What's up everybody, my name is KAAYALL, and today I'm continuing on with my film series review. So, we're moving on from one clown and we're moving on to the next clown. I am of course talking about It Chapter 2 and Pennywise, obviously. Wasn't thinking of anyone else, of course, no one in this room, for example. Definitely not clown. So, directed by Andy Muschietti, this film takes place 27 years after the events of Chapter 1, which took place in 1989. It is now the year 2016 and Pennywise has awoken from his long sleep, and he's now feasting and killing people based off of the fear and negativity of the town in Derry. The Losers Club, now much older, must reunite after so many years apart and face this evil entity once again and defeat him for good, before it's too late for anybody else. Let's talk about the Losers Club. Beginning with the leader of the group, Bill Denbrough, played by James McAvoy. Now this older version of Bill is a successful horror writer, aside from the fact that the endings to his stories are usually very terrible. This gets basically exploited throughout the entire movie by various characters, and it becomes kind of a running joke in the movie, even so bad that Stephen King makes a cameo and tells Bill that his endings suck. Bill as an adult is still facing the survivor's guilt trauma that he faced in the first movie, which of course is because his younger brother Georgie was murdered in the beginning of the film by Pennywise. And Pennywise is taunting him throughout the movie, saying you couldn't save Georgie and you're certainly not going to save anybody else. And Bill must face this past trauma and kind of come to terms with it and accept the fact that he was a terrible brother to his younger brother. Which kind of makes sense, because the reason why Bill wasn't there for Georgie in the first movie was because he was pretending to be sick just to not play with his younger brother. And that's pretty cold, man. James McAvoy does a brilliant performance as Bill Denbrough, especially with the stammering and also that weird way that Bill looks at other characters, kind of like in a deep way. I really like how all the sort of adult cast take their inspiration and influences from what the child actors did in the first movie and just follow what they did, and I think that's a really good idea. And kind of very linear as well. Mike Hanlon, played by Isaiah Mustafa, who is actually the Old Spice guy in those cool adverts. So in this movie, Mike, as an adult, is basically the backbone of the Losers Club. He stays behind after the events of Chapter 1 and spends the whole 27 years studying it, finding about how Pennywise arrived to this earth, so the origin behind him and ways that they could defeat Pennywise for good. So Mike is kind of like the old timer in a way. Even though they're all sort of the same age, he's kind of aged more than the other cast. He's very old fashioned. Mike in this movie has to face the past trauma of his parents being burnt alive in a house fire. In this movie, Pennywise sort of twists that and makes it out that Mike's parents were drug addicts and they were sort of bad people that deserved what happened to them. And of course, the town of Derry, this spread across the town, and they believed what Pennywise displayed them as to be. And of course, Mike has to once again face Henry Bowers, a weird, militant villain that we saw in the first movie, and they had a very big altercation in that film. In this film, they have a smaller one, but it's still very tense and very significant to Mike and his sort of fears. Beverly Marsh, played by Jessica Chastain, is now a successful fashion designer as an adult, but from what happened in the first movie, she still has sort of an abusive relationship, not with her father this time, but with her husband. Going back to Derry, the past traumas that she has to deal with is still her abusive father and how he still has sort of an influence surrounding her life now as an adult. And of course, when she was bullied by other girls as a kid. Jessica Chastain did a wonderful performance as Beverly Marsh, and it's really weird, like if the child actor of Beverly Marsh was to grow up, she kind of would look like Jessica Chastain, so it's a perfect casting once again. Ben Hanscom, played by Jay Ryan, is now a successful architect. He's also lost a lot of weight, as of course in Chapter 1, Ben was the overweight kid that everyone bullied and teased. But now Ben as an adult faces some more troubling issues as he suffers from severe loneliness. In fact, in the establishing shot when we're introduced to Ben as an adult, we see him on the phone to Mike in a nice big house, but it's in the middle of nowhere. He is completely alone. In fact, he Skype calls his architecture firm rather than being physically with them in the boardroom meeting. It really shows how isolated he is as a character. In fact, there are certain shots in the movie where he's with the rest of the Losers Club, but he seems a bit more distant, and it's very noticeable and is a very fine detail. Pennywise, throughout the course of the movie, sort of torments Ben by saying that he's going to die alone and he's got nobody. In fact, Pennywise tries to bury him alive in the clubhouse and slams the door on his face and says, "You're going to die alone." And he still says that no matter who you are, you're still that fat loser you once were. Man, Pennywise is very harsh indeed. But luckily, by the end of the movie, Ben overcomes all that fear and isolation, and he plucks the courage to end up with Beverly and tell her how he feels. And I really like that Ben has that nicer, happier resolution. Eddie Kaspbrak, played by James Ranscombe, is now a risk analyst. As a child in It Chapter 1, he was a severe germaphobe. In fact, Pennywise used to torment him with a man with leprosy, someone that is highly contagious. And also, Eddie had to deal with his overbearing, overprotective mother that I guess in a way would make Eddie the way he was. Going forward into Chapter 2, Eddie is married to a woman that very much resembles his mother. In fact, the actress that plays Eddie's wife is the same actress who plays Eddie's mother. So there's that quite nice lineage, but kind of a weird one at that. Eddie, going back into Derry, still has to face those fears of being a germaphobe and also his overbearing mother and the impact that she had on his life. Luckily, Eddie decides to kind of become more confident as the film progresses, despite being very much afraid. I really felt bad for Eddie because I really liked his character. He was very funny and had some amazing one-liners, but it sucked that he had to be killed at the end of the film by Pennywise. After all, he managed to save Richie from being killed. Richie Tozer, played by Bill Hader, is a successful comedian, although he doesn't really write his own source material. Richie going back to Derry has to face past traumas like the Losers as well, but it's not to do with his fear of clowns, but a secret side to himself that he keeps concealed. As a kid, he didn't really understand this much, but as an adult he really understands it, as he is gay, and doesn't really want everyone else knowing about his secret as he's afraid of what other people might think of him. But the secret important message of this movie is be proud of who you are and don't be afraid of who you want to be and how you feel. And certainly in this movie, Richie needs to face that as Pennywise taunts him throughout the movie about knowing his secret. At the end of the movie, Richie finally overcomes this and embraces that side of himself as he reveals that he had feelings for Eddie, who sadly got killed in the movie after risking his life for Richie. And it's a bit of a bittersweet moment for Richie as he's finally accepting himself and he doesn't care what anyone else thinks, which is really good, but he's lost someone that he really loved, and that's very tragic. But Richie in this movie, no matter what, is the comedian. He is the Joker of the group and he had stole so many scenes in the movie. Pennywise, played by Bill Skarsgård, he is just as sinister, creepy, and aggressive as he was in Chapter 1. He has this innocence to him, but of course that innocence is false, as he's very malicious and vicious. He is definitely going to terrify and scare future generations to come. Pennywise in this movie is just ruthless. Nobody is safe, no matter who they are. Pennywise is going to feast and stop at nothing. And also his journey in this movie is to torment the Losers to breaking point. After being defeated in Chapter 1, he definitely wants to make sure that none of them succeed this time. But of course, as we know at the end of the movie, they do succeed. Pennywise really creates some very interesting and terrifying forms in this movie, such as the old lady Mrs. Kirsch, which definitely would give you nightmares with years to come by, and his final true form, which was very interesting. It's a different spin on what the miniseries version of Pennywise looked like at the end of the movie, which was like a giant spider crab thing, whereas this time it's like a clown spider thing, which is actually kind of cool. At least we still get to see Pennywise's creepy face. And Bill Skarsgård plays the role perfectly. And I think he, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker is going to be a classic villain in years to come. I really like the opening sequence as it really sets the tone for the rest of the film. Yes, it's very brutal and horrible, but it really shows that Pennywise enjoys the sort of thing. He likes the negativity and the fear, and as the audience, we realise that nobody is safe no matter what, and it's very tense. I certainly liked the montage of Mike assembling the rest of the losers and finding out what they got up to over the 27 years and seeing how life has been affected after sort of defeating Pennywise in chapter 1. I like the restaurant sequence because I like how they're all reunited after so many years and sort of reminiscing until Pennywise ruins it. And then we have the sort of personal adventures that they have as they try and go across Derry to retrieve tokens from their past traumas. My favourite two were definitely Ben's and Richie's. Obviously with Ben's, you know, as he faces Pennywise in the school, and Pennywise says a very reminiscent line from the miniseries, which is "Kiss me, fat boy." And I really felt really bad for Ben because, you know, Pennywise taunts him with Beverly and the fact that also he's alone and doesn't have any friends, and it really reflects on Ben's isolation in chapter 2. Richie's, because it's a side of Richie that we didn't get to see in chapter 1. We saw him as the trash mouth, the comedian, and this side it's a bit more personal to Richie, and I liked how that was exploited in the movie. Another sequence I really enjoyed was the funhouse sequence. It's very dark and very tense, and obviously Bill feels even more guilty for not being there for Georgie, and Pennywise is taunting him with another kid, saying that you weren't there for Georgie, you're not there for this kid. And it's so terrifying when Pennywise is smashing his head on the glass and Bill's trying to do the same thing to get to the kid. And ultimately, Pennywise succeeds and makes Bill feel even worse, which is what he set out to do throughout the whole movie. The good points of this film: the casting, it is excellent. These actors and actresses looked as if they were made for these roles. It is so well done. Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise is very creepy and terrifying, and he is bound to scare a lot of future generations. The editing in this movie is brilliant. It flows very nicely from past to present events. So for example, in the clubhouse sequence there's a past event which then edits nicely into the present day as to what's going on. And there's certainly a lot of nostalgia in this movie, ruminating from the 1980s events that happened in chapter 1, and as the adults think about the times that they had as kids as well. Flashbacks in this movie are very significant and important, as it helps sort of give context to a scene. Can you imagine if this movie didn't have any flashbacks at all? It'd be very confusing at times. And I really liked how Stephen King made a cameo in this film as the pawn shop owner. So the bad points of It Chapter 2. I really felt that this film was really long. When I watched the film for the first time, I thought at one point I'd watched over an hour of the movie. Turns out I'd only watched at least half an hour of the film. I feel like some scenes were dragged on longer than they were supposed to and could have been made shorter. Also, another negative I thought was there were some maybe missing sequences from the film. I felt like there wasn't enough context behind Mike getting the rock. I know it's just a rock and it's a symbolism of them forming their bond, their very first bond, but I feel like there could have been some sort of extra flashback sequence for that. And also from the trailers, there is a shot of Pennywise jumping onto a wall vertically and looking down on Mike, and I feel like there's a sequence missing where Mike faces Pennywise alone. It Chapter 2 isn't as scary as Chapter 1, but that's because in Chapter 1, when you're watching the movie, you feel afraid for the kids, because they are kids and you don't want anything to happen to them. Whereas watching Chapter 2, they are now adults, and although they are getting tormented by Pennywise, that sort of inner fear doesn't really resonate, because they're adults and they're stronger and tougher than they were as kids. I feel like Chapter 1 was a little bit better as a film, but Chapter 2 isn't a bad follow-on from that movie. For It Chapter 1, I gave it a rating out of 9 out of 10. For Chapter 2, I'd give it a rating of 8 out of 10. It's not a bad film, it's pretty decent. I liked how it continued on from Chapter 1 quite nicely, and that it's a very nice conclusion to this whole big It film. I certainly think that it was a bit lengthy in certain places. Some scenes could have been cut shorter, and I felt like maybe there was a missing sequence or two. But aside from that, I really like the cast. It is excellent. Bill Skarsgård does a wonderful performance as Pennywise, and he is very, very creepy. I liked certain sequences in this film. I liked some personal moments that the Losers Club had, and the nostalgia and how they reunited after the 27-year gap. So comment below what you thought of It Chapter 2. What were your favourite sequences? Who were your favourite characters? And what did you think of Pennywise? Also, what themes did you pick up on and any Easter eggs that you noticed in the film? And also, do you prefer this version of It, the miniseries, or the book? I personally really like this version of It. It feels very different and way better than the miniseries. Like and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys again for some more film reviews and videos. Bye!